100 years ago, wealthy Chicago students Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb brutally murdered 14-year-old Bobby Franks. Shows Nathan Leopold's confession made upon being confronted by the revelation that his close friend, reluctant lover, and partner in crime Richard Loeb has already confessed, spilled all the key details of the murder, and is pointing the finger at him as one of the pair who actually physically killed Bobby Franks. About the kidnapping, murder, and ransom plot that contemporary newspapers dubbed the crime of the century, one said, "It is as easy for us to justify as an entomologist in impaling a beetle on a pin." This performance also conveys Leopold's sexuality and the explicit gay motif of the film through his mannerisms, subtext, and innuendo. In this video, we covered Nathan Leopold's early life and how he became the longest criminal in history. Of the two, Leopold was the smarter, with an IQ so far above the regular scale that it was impossible to attach a precise figure to it. Estimates are that he scored between 210 and 220 on the Binet scale. Loeb had an IQ of 160. Leopold also had been a precocious child. Nathan Freudenthal Leopold Jr. was born on November 19, 1904, in Chicago, Illinois. Leopold was the son of a wealthy family of immigrant German Jews who had made a freight and transport-related fortune since their arrival in the United States. Leopold was reportedly intellectually precocious at an early age, though the reports of this may have been exaggerated when he penned his autobiography. He had suffered as a youth, being bullied at a public school and later allegedly sexually abused by a governess, Matilda, when he was 12. By many accounts, Leopold was sensitive about his appearance. He threw himself into intellectual pursuits where he met with remarkable success. Leopold had studied 15 languages and claimed to speak 5 fluently. He had achieved a measure of national recognition as an ornithologist. Leopold and several other ornithologists identified nesting sites of Kirtland's warblers and made astute observations about the parasitic nesting behavior of brown-headed cowbirds, which threatened the warblers. He maintained his interest in birds after his crime, raising birds in prison and working to help with the struggling Puerto Rican parrot population after his release on parole. Leopold's intellect set him apart from his contemporaries, and the boy had difficulty making friends. This was a trait that continued throughout his education and was made more difficult by his own superior attitude, in relation to both his family's wealth and his own intelligence. When the family moved to the exclusive Chicago neighborhood of Kenwood, he was transferred to the private Harvard School. There, his educational advancement was even more rapid, moving on to college at the age of 15 and developing a great interest in ornithology. At the University of Chicago in 1920, Leopold met a fellow prodigy. Leopold graduated with honors from the University of Chicago in March 1923. As a transfer student, Loeb barely graduated from the University of Michigan in June 1923. Both men then pursued postgraduate studies at the University of Chicago, reuniting and developing a deeper connection. Leopold and Loeb were an excellent match psychologically. The brilliant but socially inept Leopold was enthralled by the handsome and vivacious Loeb, and Loeb found an excellent alter ego for his fantasy world in which he was supreme. They became inseparable and developed a sexual relationship. Loeb continued to embroil Leopold in a number of criminal pursuits, using the promise of sexual favors as an enticement, and became increasingly obsessed with the development and commission of the perfect crime. On January 28, 1936, Loeb was attacked by fellow inmate James Day with a straight razor in a shower room. He died soon after in the prison hospital. Leopold continued with his work after Loeb's death. Despite suffering from depression, he became a model prisoner and made many significant contributions to improving conditions at Stateville Penitentiary. These included reorganizing the prison library, revamping the schooling system and teaching its students, and volunteer work in the prison hospital. In 1944, Leopold volunteered for the Stateville Penitentiary malaria study. He was deliberately inoculated with malaria pathogens and then subjected to several experimental malaria treatments. He later wrote that all his good work in prison and after his release was an effort to compensate for his crime. On August 30th, 1971, Leopold died of a diabetes-related heart attack. Leopold and Loeb, who were 19 and 18, respectively at the time, settled on kidnapping and murdering a younger adolescent as their perfect crime. They spent 7 months planning everything, from the method of abduction to the disposal of the body. To obfuscate the actual nature of their crime and motive, they decided to make a ransom demand and devised an intricate plan for collecting it, involving a long series of complex instructions to be communicated, one set at a time by phone. They typed the final set of instructions involving the actual money drop in the form of a ransom note, using the typewriter stolen from the fraternity house. A chisel was purchased to knock their victim unconscious. They also purchased a length of rope. To make sure each of them was equally culpable in the murder, they planned to wrap it around their victim's neck and each pulls on one end, strangling him to death. After a lengthy search for a suitable victim, mostly on the grounds of the Harvard School for Boys in the Kenwood area, where Leopold had been educated, the pair decided upon Robert Bobby Franks, the 14-year-old son of wealthy Chicago watch manufacturer Jacob Franks. Bobby Franks was an across-the-street neighbor of Loeb's who had played tennis at the Loeb residence several times. Leopold and Loeb put their plan in motion on the afternoon of May 21, 1924. Using an automobile that Leopold rented under the name Morton D. Ballard, they offered Franks a ride as he walked home from school. The boy initially refused because his destination was less than 2 blocks away, but Loeb persuaded him to enter the car to discuss a tennis racket that he had been using. The precise sequence of the events that followed remains in dispute, but a preponderance of opinion placed Leopold behind the wheel of the car while Loeb sat in the back seat with the chisel. Loeb struck Franks, who was sitting in front of him in the passenger seat, several times in the head with the chisel, then dragged him into the back seat and gagged him, where he died. With the body on the floor of the back seat, out of view, the men drove to their predetermined dumping spot near Wolf Lake in Hammond, Indiana, 25 miles, 40 kilometers, south of Chicago. After nightfall, they removed and discarded Franks's clothes, then concealed the body in a culvert along the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks north of the lake. To obscure the body's identity, they poured hydrochloric acid on the face and genitals to disguise the fact that he had been circumcised, as circumcision was unusual among non-Jews in the United States at the time. By the time the two men returned to Chicago, word had already spread that Franks was missing. Leopold called Franks's mother, identifying himself as George Johnson, and told her that Franks had been kidnapped. Instructions for delivering the ransom would follow. After mailing the typed ransom note and burning their blood-stained clothing, then cleaning the bloodstains from the rented vehicle's upholstery, they spent the remainder of the evening playing cards. Once the Franks family received the ransom note the following morning, Leopold called a second time and dictated the first set of instructions for the ransom payment. The intricate plan stalled almost immediately when a nervous family member forgot the address of the store where he was supposed to receive the next set of directions, and it was abandoned entirely when word came that Franks's body had been found. Leopold and Loeb destroyed the typewriter and burned a car robe. They then went about their lives as usual. Chicago police launched an intensive investigation. Rewards were offered for information. Police found a pair of eyeglasses near Franks's body. Although common in prescription and frame, they were fitted with an unusual hinge purchased by only 3 customers in Chicago, one of whom was Leopold. When questioned, Leopold offered the possibility that his glasses might have dropped out of his pocket during a birdwatching trip the previous weekend. Leopold and Loeb were summoned for formal questioning on May 29th. They asserted that on the night of the murder, they had picked up 2 women in Chicago using Leopold's car, then dropped them off sometime later near a golf course without learning their last names. Their alibi was exposed as a fabrication when Leopold's chauffeur told police that he was repairing Leopold's car while the men claimed to be using it. The chauffeur's wife confirmed that the car was parked in the Leopold garage on the afternoon of the murder. The destroyed typewriter was recovered from the Jackson Park Lagoon on June 7th. On May 21, 1924, Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb kidnapped Bobby Franks and bludgeoned him to death. The thrill killing, one of many to be dubbed the crime of the century, remains a puzzle. Ghastly crimes regularly occurred, even in upscale neighborhoods like Hyde Park. The body of a murdered University of Chicago student was dumped at 58th and Kimbark. A young man went out to mail a letter and disappeared, his bloated corpse washing up on the beach at 64th Street a month later. A cab driver stepped from a streetcar at 55th, and Dorchester was jumped, etherized, and castrated. Two other men were similarly maimed by gland pirates, feeding the market for a quack testicle rejuvenation therapy popular at the time. The Leopold and Loeb case continues to fascinate us today, a chilling reminder of the dark potential that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary people. Their crime was not just a senseless act of violence, but a twisted attempt to prove their own intellectual superiority. The question of whether Leopold was the mastermind or simply under the thrall of Loeb remains unanswered. However, their fate serves as a warning against the dangers of arrogance and the allure of a warped sense of morality.